Well, good morning, everyone. It's the fourth Friday of the month at 11 o'clock. It must be time for the Digital Learning Webinar. Hi, my name is Jim Ptaszynski. I'm the Vice President for Digital Learning, and we are so pleased that you're with us today. We have a wonderful series of guests talking about some of the things that are going on across the university. And we're going to go ahead and get started with those in just a minute, but let me just make a quick, brief announcement. Some of you may know that we have the Designing Effective Online Courses, a faculty development workshop to help our faculty move online, as well as for the staff that support them. And we had in our first cohort about 2 weeks ago, 637 people join us for this course. And the second cohort that started last Monday, we had 830 people joining us. So about 1,500 faculty and staff have been involved in this exciting course. We are looking at whether or not to offer another section of it. It seems that from the emails I'm getting, there's a need for it. We haven't decided exactly when that will be. Most people want it sooner rather than later in order to utilize the concepts that are learned in that class for their online teaching in the fall. But we'll get out through the DLI blog mailing list more information on that in the next couple days. There will probably be a sign-up sheet that we put out online as we decide that. So keep looking out for that. Go to the dli.northcarolina.edu site for more information on that as it goes forward. Also, we have a direct link that is DLI4, the number 4, faculty.northcarolina.edu, which talks about the program and gives you information as well as the syllabus, etc. But so far it's been a phenomenal success and a lot of great conversations going on between faculty and staff on how we can improve with online learning. So today we are so pleased to have 3 great presenters. Wanda White from Winston-Salem State will be talking to us about digital equity and technological inclusion in online courses, a tremendously important topic. We do have in one of the modules of the Designing Effective Online Courses a small section on equity, but we're looking forward to hearing from Wanda and rounding out our experience on this very important topic. So we thank you, Wanda, for talking with us today about this. And then also we have Jeannie Hoover and Jacqueline Solis from East Carolina and from UNC Chapel Hill talking about OER for remote and hybrid teaching. This is becoming more and more important going forward. We do have some things in the Designing Effective Online Courses around OER, but especially in these times when we need to make our materials more and more accessible, OER seems to be one of the strategies in doing that. So without me bloviating anymore, I'm going to turn it over to Wanda now. Wanda?
Good morning, everyone. So as Jim said, my topic this morning is on digital equity and technological inclusion in online courses. I am from Winston-Salem State University, where I work in the Center for Teaching and Learning. This presentation will share information on ways that educators in higher ed can ensure that online courses are equitable, inclusive, and accessible to students relevant to technology access, tool availability, and online content interaction. Upon completion of this webinar, you will be able to recognize how a digital divide for students can create problems for student success and understand ways to include resources and options for your students who may have digital limitations. Before I get into the bulk of my topic, I have a scenario I want you to consider. Meet Jeff. Jeff is a junior at the University of XYZ, and he has suddenly been shifted to 100% online instruction due to COVID-19. Here's a little background on Jeff. He has always been a very diligent student who never made less than an A in his courses. Jeff lives on campus and rarely went home on weekends. He also works at the local grocery store near his campus to help earn money so his parents wouldn't have to send him money. He has 3 younger siblings at home in grades 11th, 7th, and 5th. With 4 students in the house, it is usually very busy and noisy. Whenever Jeff goes home for breaks or holidays, and if he needs to do any assignments for his courses, he would always go to the public library to complete them and submit them into Canvas. Jeff was saving up to buy his own laptop and printer. His parents have a computer at home, but his siblings use this one too. Now Jeff is back at home. He has 15 hours of coursework that need to be completed successfully online. He has never taken an online course before. He is a fast learner, but his biggest concern is how will he be able to access his courses online at home. With 3 other students at home who also have to complete their assignments online and 1 laptop between the 4 of them, they will need to schedule time for each. One more thing, Jeff lives in an area where high-speed internet access is not available. Their internet is slow. So in the past, when Jeff needed to complete assignments, he would walk to the public library, remember, and the community center to access their internet. Both are closed due to COVID. Jeff is very worried about how he can maintain his great GPA and continue to do well in college. Jeff is a student who has digital access limitations. When we design our online courses, we have to think about Jeff and his situation. I will refer back to Jeff often throughout this presentation. So it is no doubt that we are a society that depend on digital devices. And it's no doubt that our students are pretty well versed in using those digital devices, but oftentimes, many of them don't have access to the technology once they leave campus. Many of them use our campus computer labs or other digital workspaces. What does the research say about this digital divide? Well, there is one in higher ed. There's one in public ed, K through 12 as well. The digital divide is the perceived gap between those who have access to the latest information technologies and those who do not. One study suggests that the digital divide between information haves and have-nots along racial and socioeconomic lines seem to widen as time passes. That's a pretty good hypothesis considering that technologies change daily. To address the issues of digital equity and technology inclusion, educational leaders are in positions now to ensure equitable digital opportunities are made available for students to help bridge the digital divide. Other research talks about how there is limited access to the internet in inner cities and rural areas. Jeff is one of those. Many recent research studies indicate that access has decreased with the inclusion of smartphones and mobile devices such as tablets or iPads. However, for the purpose of accessing a course online, it is critically rising to higher levels. One study indicated that 37% of college students use their smartphones for online and hybrid classes. That's to view their lectures, access assignment requirements, submit assignments, and get this, even take quizzes and tests using their phones. Here are some quick facts on technology access. There is a higher percentage and a racial divide that exists with access to technology. White students having higher access and minorities having less. In 2015, 2 of the main reasons students lacked access to internet at home were, 1, it was deemed too expensive, and the other, some families decided that it was not needed or not interested in having it. Fortunately, this past spring, we did have some major internet vendors offering free access to qualified households. I hope they continue to do that because it looks like this isn't going away too soon. Internet access being too expensive was more commonly the main barrier for students in low-income families and for children whose parents had low levels of educational attainment. And a significant number of our first-generation students and/or students who receive Pell Grant often do not purchase a laptop their freshman year. They will wait until their junior or senior year of college because sometimes they're using those funds for books, other supplies, and other needs. When we are in the classroom as faculty, we always try to make sure that our students have what they need. We can assess by looking at students what limitations they may have when it comes to textbooks, and even technology. So in a traditional face-to-face classroom, it is easy for us to make that conscious effort to address equity, accessibility, and inclusion for students. But what about when they're online? How will we know? Unless they tell us, unless we assess and ask them early. Here are some things we need to consider. How do we support students who may return to a living space when they no longer have access to a campus computer lab with all of the state-of-the-art technology that they're used to having? When instruction does shift 100% online, as it did this past spring, what can we do instructionally to make sure that lack of technology access does not ruin the academic success of the student? We know there is a thin line between success and failure in a course. Missing one test or one quiz can be detrimental to a student's grade. Here are some ways, some things we need to consider as we design our courses. How can students maintain grades if they have limitations digitally? How can students complete the course if they're having access issues? And then even further than that, if they don't maintain the grade and don't complete the course and fail, will they come back to us the next semester? So there are a lot of parameters to digital access. Another thing we need to consider, how do we ensure that every student who is enrolled in the course has the needed technology tools and internet access that is required to be successful in your course? Well, there were some great things done this past spring by our system and by individual universities. Many of you provided laptops and hotspots. Some even sought corporate sponsorship to help with students who needed technology access. Here are some things we can do on our end as well as we go forward. Communicate technology requirements early. That's not going to cover all students, but it will help some families be able to prepare. But this one is the one I really want to focus on. Instructional methodology. What are some things that we can do as we design our courses and even teach our courses that can help students who have those limitations with digital access? So the first one I want to talk about is that universal technology requirement statement. So hopefully by now, all universities have some type of requirement statement, letting students know what are the minimum basic requirements that they need to function in an online class. Also remain consistent with the technology requirements that are given by the university. That means that we as faculty can't say, oh, I'm going to add on a couple more tools for my class. They really need this to be successful in my class. We need to avoid adding on those needed software or tech tools because many times students don't have the resources to purchase that. Another way, looking at instructional methodology. So it is no secret that teaching online and teaching in person are totally different. So anybody who had the assumption that, oh, I can just go from traditional teaching and just put everything online and just do the same as I did before, probably were a little bit surprised. There's little support sometimes provided for faculty on how to teach in an online environment. Fortunately, our system are offering different types of workshops, these webinars, and other support. While most assume that the knowledge and skills required to teach in an online classroom are readily translated from the traditional classroom, there are differences. Finding a balance in asynchronous and synchronous lessons are key. So we know that synchronous lessons, real time, when we get to talk to our students via Zoom, Skype, Big Blue Button, or other video formats, that's a lot of faculty preference because it mimics what we do in a traditional class. We can see them, they can see us. It feels comfortable. It is very much what we are typically comfortable doing in our classes. But asynchronous learning when we have to pre-record those lectures or presentations may not be as comfortable, or it may take a little bit more time. But there is significant research that shows a balance between synchronous and asynchronous help students who may have digital access limitations. So putting things out as learning modules, discussion boards, pre-recorded videos, collaborative groups, and using screen capture tools such as Panopto or Screencast-O-Matic provide content for those students who may not be able to tune in at 1 to 1:50 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Asynchronous assignments do assist with digital limitations. Remember Jeff? He had that part-time job. There are 4 people in his house who need to use 1 laptop. Having asynchronous lectures out there for Jeff or students like him allow him to be able to access you giving your lecture, maybe not in real time, but he still gets the lecture. Asynchronous lessons also allow students to go to other sites to complete their assignments. Remember Jeff again. What if the 11th grader is using the laptop? Well, he can go to a neighbor's house or a relative's house and access and still get your presentations and your assignments. Asynchronous lessons allow the professor to create learning modules which puts all of the requirements for the week or unit in one place, which makes instruction and assignments organized, systematic, and quicker to locate. That leads to student success because students now know where to get the information. Let's talk about how we create our assignments. Did you know that how we ask a student to complete an assignment can create a digital limitation for some? Here are a few ways. In this first one, I was guilty of when I taught online. I taught English. You can only submit your assignment as a Word document. Guess what? That was convenient for me because all I had to do was open up the Word document and then insert comments or send voice comments and then upload it back and send it to them. But what about those students who did not have Microsoft Word programs now that they're at home? Maybe they only had access to it on campus. That would be a limitation for some. Here's another. There's a movie that you will need to watch located in Canvas. So students with that low internet access speed, or even, believe it or not, some still have dial-up, they wouldn't be able to watch that movie or even access, I've seen some say access Netflix. Netflix is not free. So if the student does not have Netflix, they have to purchase it. Here's another, inconsistency in due dates. Each week, assignments are due on a different day. Now, it is so convenient for us if we have a hair appointment or we need to drop something off at the cleaners and we had a 1 o'clock class meeting, we could send an email out to students and say, oh, the 1 o'clock meeting has been changed to 3 o'clock. Meet me then. What about those students who have to go into work at 3, like Jeff? And they were thinking, oh, my class is at 1. I have time to grab lunch and then go to work. Now their schedule has changed based on our convenience. So being consistent with due dates helps students with digital limitations to plan their schedule. Here's the last one. You will need to purchase blank, and you can fill in that blank with a novel, software, tech tool, or even some type of digital access on the internet to complete this week's assignment. No matter how little the amount we think it is, we have to consider that some students may not have it that quickly with that shorter notice. $29.99 may be too much for some students who just don't have it. Let's talk about how we assess our students and how that can pose a digital limitation access. So many students access their online courses with their smartphones, 37% according to our earlier slide. So if they are doing that to access their test, many of the tests that we use online proctoring services, such as Respondus. Well, if students access using their phone, they wouldn't be able to take the test because Respondus does not work on a smartphone. So they're not able to take the test. They may miss your quiz or your test simply because they can't access it if they're only using their phone. We are concerned about cheating. It is very important. So thinking about ways how we can include more formative assessments that are subjective can reduce the stress of students who have to take a proctored online test and don't have the tool, but it also reduces their attempts to cheat on our end. We don't have to really worry because subjective assessments are more difficult to find answers if they're Googling or trying to cheat. So incorporating more of those can help in two ways. Textbook requirements. My colleagues in their next presentation will talk to you about some wonderful open educational resources, but including those types of external tools in our classes, or even finding ebooks, publishers who offer their textbooks as ebooks. If you find those and include those in your courses, that's going to help students who have digital limitations. We know students choose to not buy a book. That's no secret. But in an online class, it becomes even more prevalent. They will choose not to purchase a book. So if we can find ways to include open resources for them, then that will help a lot of students with digital limitations. And also, ebooks are relatively less costly than hard copy books. This terminology is something I made up, semantics of assumptions, but it's really just insensitivity. Here are some assumptions that we may say that could have technology barriers for students. You must have your camera on when we Zoom. Now, we know the rationale behind that. We want to see their face. We want to see if they're engaged. We want to make sure they're not taking a nap while we're giving out information or having class. But what if they're accessing Zoom by their phone? What if their camera on their laptop is broken or they don't have a webcam? What if their living situation is not one that they want seen on camera? Of course, we can encourage them to use a virtual background. What if the desktop is located in the family room with other people around because there's no home office? Remember Jeff? He said his house was busy and noisy. Another thing that we do, changing synchronous meeting times. I mentioned that earlier. I won't go more into that, but keeping consistency is also being sensitive to students with those needs. Here are some simple ways that we can support our students who have tech limitations. Of course, use asynchronous lessons, include formative assessments, communicate technology needs early and avoid changing those. Allow students to submit assignments in multiple formats, including video, Google Docs, screen captures, or any kind of free technology tools that may be available to them. We know that asynchronous is better, and in most cases, students who don't have access, they can then access it at another time if you are presenting a synchronous lesson. Weekly assignments work best in online pedagogy because it assists students with digital limitations. It gives them a longer amount of time to access work. Those big box online universities live by this because they know their students work and have different adult schedules. Set dates and times that you post assignments and due dates and be consistent with it. If you post on Monday morning, keep it consistent. If you expect assignments due on Friday night at a certain time, keep it consistent. Create an alternative course plan. Yes, this requires a little more work from us. It requires a little bit more planning that we are used to doing, but your student success in your class will be worth it. Identify digital technology tools that are available for students from your university and other places that are free, and put them in your syllabus and in your course. And advocate for a campus-wide online orientation inventory that all students must take. This will help detect early who may need those resources and who we can get laptops and hotspots to. Communication is key. Encourage your students to be open and upfront with you about their course needs and their technology needs. The more you know about what digital limitations they have, the more you can help to try to accommodate and bridge the gap. That may mean the survey by your university, or you could do one in your own course. And it could be in the form of a survey or a discussion board. The more we can dialogue about digital equity and technology limitations with our students, the more solutions we can find to support them. We can begin to build partnerships with technology corporations who would like to invest in closing the digital gaps in education. Here's what I know about the future. It happens as a result of what we do today. So let's plan to help our students and bridge that gap.
Wanda, that was great. Thank you so very much. We're gonna want to incorporate a lot of what you just talked about into the designing effective online courses. It's just so impactful. We will take a couple questions real quick before we go to our next presentation. If you either want to put them in the chat or turn on your video and your sound and ask that question. We'll be glad to take one or two right now. While people are kind of staging that, I would ask you this, Wanda. When faculty members do such a great job of taking everything you said into consideration, what would you recommend as far as how do they test to see if their students are prepared or have accessible these things that they need? So, for example, if you have specific programs you want them to use and they're at no cost, but you're not sure if they've integrated them yet into their computer, et cetera, et cetera. So is there a way you might advise us to kind of test readiness on the things that you have designed? A survey or something?
Of course, we were thrust into it in the spring, but I would follow up with students from last semester to see how some of the things we incorporated worked for them and build from there. So if we incorporated a new tool, like for example, if you used a screen capture tool, and I would ask students how things worked for them and get some feedback and then go forward with that.
Good, thank you. And we do have a question in the chat. Myra is asking, I'm already thinking about alternative course plan for those with slow or no internet. Is it feasible to provide audio and video instruction on a DVD or SD card or some other format?
So yes, some institutions still do the DVDs and send those out to students. Also recordings, audio don't typically, if you have low speed internet, it doesn't typically affect audio. So if you put your lecture on audio rather than video, then they're more likely able to hear that and stream that better. It won't be perfect, it'll still be slow, but a video would never download with low internet access.
Very good, okay. Well, we're getting lots of thank yous in the chat, and we'll come back to you at the end for other questions that folks have. And at this point, we're going to turn it over to Jeannie and Jacqueline for their presentation on open education resources.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us okay. My name, again, is Jeannie Hoover, and I'm at East Carolina University. And I'm with Jacqueline, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jacqueline Solis from UNC Chapel Hill. And first of all, that was such a great lead in to what we want to talk about. Everything that Dr. White talked about is just so important. And I think what we're going to talk about, open educational resources, also ties into that inclusivity and equity for students. And we wanted to talk specifically about using open educational resources during these times of remote and hybrid learning and how we think they're even more important now than they were before. So to start out, we'll tell you what OER are. So open educational resources are not just free of charge. They have been specifically funded, published, created, and licensed to be freely used. They're available for adaptation by others and for distribution by others. So these are not just free. You as a faculty member can use them for your own purposes. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. Open textbooks are one type of OER that are designed to be used like traditional textbooks. We're going to talk about both of these kinds of open educational resources today. So the first question is like, why do we say OER is more important now than ever? First of all, OER are created online to be used online or to be downloaded in common formats like PDF and EPUB. They are not special versions that you need a special reader for, like a Kindle. They are very, very plain, downloadable text. And I think this is good for those asynchronous classes where a student might be able to go somewhere and grab an internet connection for a short period of time. They could download the chapters they need from the book and then go back home to read them or use them on their device. Another reason that OER are really important now, I'm a librarian, and we saw a real spike in requests for the library to purchase ebooks and electronic texts as we moved off campus in March. And the fact is that many publishers don't make their books available in a format that libraries can purchase. Either they don't make them available at all, or they make them available in like a one user license at a time. So the entire class can't ever access the material at the same time. It would be one student at a time if a library could even get the book. So it's been a real problem. Libraries are also, while Dr. White was correct that the individual ebooks are cheaper often like on Amazon, libraries end up paying 2 to 3 times the cost for ebooks if we're buying the institutional license. So as library budgets are shrinking even more, the ebooks eat up more of our funding. So the more we can go with open educational resources, the more we can free up library resources for other things. The other thing that's really important, and this really ties in with the previous presentation, is that OER allow all students to have equal access to the same materials. In a person-to-person on-campus environment, students utilize a multiplicity of tactics to save money. Students cannot afford textbooks as we now require them to purchase. And students often do things like roommates will share a text, or students in a class will work together to share one copy and kind of pass it around. Now that we've sent students off to their own homes, they're not able to use those tactics anymore. So we're going to see even fewer students with access to the print materials. Another tactic that students use to access print materials for their courses on campus is through either through a library print collection or through course reserves. And even though we are reopening the library in Chapel Hill in August, reserves are going to be a real problem because we still need to quarantine the materials after each use. So we kind of did some math, and with a 24 to 48, 72-hour quarantine for these materials, like 1 student or 2 a week is going to be able to use a print resource through reserves. So reserves are not something students can use either. So we want to think about ways that we can get affordable materials into students' hands. So the question is then, where do I find open textbooks and open educational resources? For those formatted textbooks, there's 2 places that we really recommend. The Open Textbook Library is based out of the University of Minnesota, and they have a robust program of peer reviewing textbooks so that you as the instructor can see the content, you can see the reviews of other faculty, using a standard rubric that the Open Textbook Library provides. So you can really see, will this textbook work for my class? What have other people commented on the quality of this book? So I would highly recommend looking there. And then we wanted to call out OpenStax as well. This was a funded project out of Rice University. And they have sort of a brand name and a look to their books. If you look at them, you might recognize them. And OpenStax is a very sort of sophisticated publisher of open resources, open textbooks. For open educational resources, broader than just textbooks, excuse me, the George Mason OER MetaFinder is a search engine of search engines of open educational resources. So it's going to search a lot of different repositories all in one place. Merlot is sort of a long-running open educational resource repository. And you'll find things in here that are really high quality, and you'll find things in here that are 10 years old or more and maybe don't look as good as we would like them to now. But it's a great resource. It's very broad. There's a lot of subject matter and a lot of different kinds of materials in Merlot. OER Commons and Oasis are other repositories that have things like lab notes, videos, other kinds of open educational resources beyond just textbooks. Here's an example from the Open Textbook Library. This is their Introduction to Psychology book published by the University of Minnesota Libraries Publishing. And you can see here that it has a 4-star review with 22 reviews. And when you go into the record, you can see more about the content of the book. You can see the reviews. So here's, when you click into the book, this is what you're going to see. You can see that it was written in 2015. Multiple formats, so PDF, EPUB, it's got multiple formats for students to choose from. You can see the reviews there. It's actually more than 4-star reviews. And you can see the first review starts out, it was written by a professor of psychology from Valencia College just in June. And so that's Dr. Freeman's review there. And you can see all the other 22 reviews as well. You see the chapters, table of contents. All of this is just downloadable in a straight PDF, and students can read it with a free PDF reader.
So let me ask you a question while you're doing that, and this has been great. You know, there's so much OER material out there, and some of it's really, really good, and some of it's not as good. And sometimes it's more than just any individual faculty member can handle. Do you see at your institutions or elsewhere where faculty are kind of coming together to kind of curate OER and then use it across several courses or several faculty that are teaching the same course? Do you see any of that happening?
We do. We've seen some entire departments make a choice for one OER to use for maybe all of their 100 level or 200 level courses. And it is easier when you have that support. Another thing that we've heard from faculty are, gosh, these resources are great, but I teach a more niche course. I don't see any materials on that. And one thing we'd love to see is faculty coming together from across institutions who also work in that same niche to create some of their own materials. Because the power of these open educational resources is really not just in the fact that they're free for students, but that they allow you as the faculty member to take this foundation, and there's another slide that's coming to talk about this, but I'll go ahead and talk about it now. They allow you as the faculty member to take this foundation of the course and say, oh, you know, the last paper I wrote was about this topic, and I'd like to update this section of the book. And these are open, so they are absolutely available for you to put in your own materials within the text and create your own version that fits best for your class.
Excellent. So it seems that Jeannie has the slides back up.
Let's see.
Sorry about that. Lost the internet for a second.
So we were worried about me losing the internet, so she was controlling the slides, but
you were just trying to prove Wanda's point. I understand.
Well, you know, I want to say too, it's so true. Like even one of my staff members emailed me earlier this week, and you know, she lives a mile or two from campus here in Chapel Hill. Her fiber got cut. Someone was working across the street and cut her fiber. She's not going to have internet from Thursday through Monday.
Oh my.
So it's not just the rural areas that have these troubles. Like, and I can't tell you how many staff meetings I've had cut short in the past few months because right here in town, people's internet isn't what it needs to be to support these things. So the more that we can support students with resources they can access asynchronously, lectures they can access asynchronously, the more chance we have for students to succeed. It's just so true. Okay. So I was just showing an example of what the open textbook library looked like. And so this is another example. This is the OER Commons. So this is a repository of not just textbooks, but other open educational resources as well. And you have all these different search options here. And I think we have an example on the next slide of the kinds of things you can access. So you can see on the left side of the search box there, you can search for activities and labs, assessments, case studies, data sets, games, assignments, lectures. And you can see here that the search has pulled up some physics options. One is a simulation, one are some lecture notes. So it's not just textbooks. These are all different kinds of open materials that you might be able to use. And you can see they said conditions of use, remix and share. So remixing is when you add in your own content to these to make it more about how you want to teach. We'll give you the resources at the end for the links. And I think the slides will all have the links too. If you search for OER Commons, I think it's oercommons.org. You should be able to find those.
Great, thank you, Jacqueline. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the other resources that are available. We get a lot of questions about ancillary materials, especially for these OER and if they're available. And there are some open textbooks specifically that do have ancillary materials attached to them. And of course, as Jacqueline showed before in OER Commons, there is potentially other types of resources in there, case studies and that type of thing that you might be able to build into your course that would be helpful ancillaries. So OER Commons is one place to look. They do include some of these materials, and I have a slide later in the presentation that will show an example. But we're going to specifically focus on OpenStax textbooks. They tend to have some of the most robust ancillary materials and extra support for faculty and for students using open textbooks. And they have, you know, PowerPoint slides, quizzes, samples, syllabus language, as well as some other options that you can look at. So we're going to take a specific look at an Intro to Sociology textbook. So again, this is from OpenStax at Rice University. And this is what you see when you go to that book. On the left, you can see that, again, you can view it online. You can download it as a PDF. You can also download it to a mobile device, but there is an option to order a print copy as well. So with some of these open textbooks specifically, you can order print copies. With OpenStax, there is an option to purchase it through Amazon. And I checked today, and the price to rent it is about $24. And to purchase it, it would be about $30 to purchase the hardcover book. Another option is that you can request these through your bookstore. If you click on that order a print copy link, there is an option to reach out to your bookstore to order copies. So if you are interested in using some of these resources, highly recommend talking to your bookstore to see if you can get, you know, some print copies in the bookstore so that students who prefer print copies or potentially students who maybe don't have internet at home could have a print copy to take with them. And I will say, you know, the other piece of it is with the print copy, if they wanted to use financial aid or something like that, they could get that through the bookstore. For the online one, I just wanted to mention that they do provide an option to highlight and add notes. Specifically for OpenStax, but there are some other resources that students can use to kind of highlight text and add notes as well. So if we take a quick look within the online version of the textbook, you can see that this is very much like a traditional textbook. You have, you know, subchapters, you also have summaries and quizzes, references, and further research. Students are also able to search within the text to find various topics. And we're going to look a little bit at the extra resources that are available. So these are some of the resources that are available for faculty to use with an OpenStax book. They have Canvas and Blackboard course cartridges, so you can import those into your LMS and use it with the textbook. So I've taken a look at the Canvas course because that's what we are using here at ECU. And essentially what comes in is you have links to the textbook. It brings in PowerPoint presentations, it brings in the quizzes, and it also brings in some helpful information about how to use the course cartridge and how to use an open textbook within your course. So those are freely available and easy to use. For Canvas specifically, you can pull those from the Canvas Commons. Additionally, you have some PowerPoint slides, basic test bank, and also a basic instructor guide. You'll notice that there are some locks on those boxes. In order to access those materials, you have to get in contact with OpenStax. They confirm that you are an instructor, and then they'll open those up for you. So that's kind of the one way that they're trying to prevent students from accessing the test banks and that type of thing. Over on the right-hand side, OpenStax has partnered with some technology partners. So some of these are publishers you might be aware of. So like Barnes & Noble, McGraw-Hill, there's some other partners in there as well, but they offer some extras for the textbook. So that might be online quizzes or maybe adaptive type content customization or adaptive learning. So that is an option that's available as well. You can see that the cost is about $11 to, I think the highest one is about $40 per student to access those materials. We'll come back to the OER Commons Hub in a later slide. And then this is what students have access to. So they also have a guide on how to use the book, also have some information on note-taking and reading that OpenStax has created. There's a YouTube channel on sociology that they can look at some videos that are a little more in depth. And then there's also a solution manual that they can use for the exercises in the text. So they do have, OpenStax has a hub within OER Commons for pretty much each of their books that I've seen or where materials are available. So for this specific book, I'm just going to take a snapshot here. This is where you can find what other faculty are using. If they submit it to OER Commons, you're welcome to use those. So the second option here at the bottom is Sociology Live. So that's something that you could bring into your course. You're also welcome to submit materials and ancillary materials that you create into this group. Okay. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how to use some of these resources, and some of these is what really makes OER unique. So you can, as Jacqueline said earlier, you can customize them and adapt them, and that's really thanks to Creative Commons licenses that allow you to have some flexibility there. And that's something that we don't necessarily see with more traditional commercial textbooks, is the ability for you as a faculty member or even a student to go in and maybe expand a book or take two textbooks and combine them together, or take out that chapter that you don't really want to use. But you can also customize them to include more local examples. So one example in this sociology textbook that I've been highlighting is chapter 19 covers health and medicine, and that looks at the United States as well as globally. But it might be really helpful for students to understand healthcare and health disparities within North Carolina, and kind of make that a little more closer to what they're familiar with. Another thing that you could bring in is, your own concepts for explaining certain topics. So you, again, can take out a chapter and replace it with something that you create. On top of that, there is an option to tie in something that we won't necessarily cover today, but something called open pedagogy, where really the students become content creators. And that's kind of a really engaging way to engage with them and have them have some active learning as well. And so this might look like inviting students to create discussion questions or test questions as part of an assignment that might go into a test bank to help build some of those extra materials. It can also look like creating materials. So editing a Wikipedia article to add some specific examples, maybe, you know, an example of rural health in North Carolina to an article or something like that. And just to give an example of what I've heard about recently for an open pedagogy project, there is a project called the NOVA project, which is an open educational resource. They focus specifically on psychology. And what they have been doing is they've had these competitions for students to create videos explaining some of the major topics in the psychology materials. So it's kind of a competition with students create the videos, kind of explain, you know, a topic, and then faculty can include those videos within, you know, their courses. So those videos would have a Creative Commons license attached to them that they can then, you know, move them over to their course. And again, you can order these in print for many options. Some of them may not have that option, but I would recommend talking either to your bookstore or to your librarian if you're interested in that and there isn't an option, and they might be able to help you see if there's a way to do that. And again, many of them integrate with many LMSs out there. The last thing we wanted to highlight, because this was just a brief introduction to OER, there are a lot of helpful resources out there for you. Some of them that we recommend checking out is the Faculty OER Toolkit from BC Campus Open Education. And this is a really great toolkit to kind of better understand OERs, how to get started with them, how to use them in your classes. There's also an introduction to OER from Affordable Learning Georgia. And that one covers just general information about open educational resources, but it does have some helpful information on how to evaluate those resources. So kind of questions you might want to ask yourself about them. Spark OER Myth Busting has some good information if you have questions around quality or accessibility or access. That's a really good place to kind of get some more information about that. And there's also, kind of on a North Carolina level, the UNC University Library Advisory Council has an OER guide, and that can give you some basic information about OERs, as well as some context if you would like more information about it. And then finally, your local librarian would be more than happy to talk to you more about open educational resources and using them in the classroom. So that is all that we had. I don't know if anybody has questions at all.
We have a couple. We have one, I'm not quite sure, Maria, I'm interested in doing an open pedagogy project with my students. I'll be teaching an upper level niche course or subject that doesn't have a lot of free materials available. And then the question cuts off. Maria, do you want to open your mic? Where do you go ahead, please.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Yeah, I teach an upper level music course that's skills based, and at that level we don't have a lot of free resources, and it's really labor intensive for instructors to create them. So I was going to have a project, a semester long project, where my students are creating these different types of resources which involve videos and audio recordings. And I'd like to have it where we make it available for everyone, like through something like the OER Commons. So, but I've never done this kind of thing before. So I could use some advice on how to get started with this open pedagogy kind of thing.
Do y'all have advice?
Yeah, so there, OER Commons does have a way that you can build content within the platform. So that's free to use. So you can kind of build a module, so to speak, within it. And then there's also, let me see if I can add it to the chat, but there's an open pedagogy website. And it's openpedagogy.org, and they have some ways to kind of get started in that and examples of how faculty are doing that within their courses. So I will add that to the chat. Yeah, if you're interested in something like that, we have, there's some other librarians in the state that are a little more involved with open pedagogy projects who might have some additional recommendations for that. So I can type my email in here if you want to send me an email as a follow-up.
And maybe you can add those to your PowerPoint and I'll insert those in the presentation. So we'll have it when we post it to the DLI website. So one question I have, and this was a great presentation. We're seeing lots in the chat. Thank you so much. This was really wonderful, and we appreciate all the time it took to put this together. So the question I have is that one of the things I hear sometimes from faculty is that the commercial publishers provide so many ancillary resources, test banks and study guides and all that other stuff. And I think you started to allude to it when it talked about all resources and what other faculty members were willing to share. But do you see that as an issue, or is that starting to become less of an issue as other faculty members are starting to share how they're using these OER resources?
I mean, yeah, it's an issue. I mean, I don't want to minimize the value that the commercial publishers provide with all those materials. But the downside of those is that the cost is just more than many students can afford. So this open educational resource movement is growing, and thanks to faculty like Dr. Fancy who are creating resources and want to share them, there's definitely more available. And I think the more that we continue as faculty to talk and to find ways to share resources, to create these things. The open pedagogy is doing some really great work with what better way to test a student's knowledge than to see if they can write a test question that's a valid test question, and then making those available. So we're seeing just a kind of a growing movement. It's very grassroots. And OpenStax has done a great job with those materials. I don't want to minimize the issue though. Absolutely no, it's important. And I think it's a matter of coming together and finding ways to sort of circumvent the commercial publishers to make these valuable resources available for all of our students.
Sure, good answer. Great, thank you. Well, one thing I will share really quickly with everyone is that two things. If you go up to the DLI website, dli.northcarolina.edu, you'll be able to get to the recording of this. As well as we do have some OER resources under COVID-19 resources. If you go to that, and let me see if it'll connect real quickly. This course enhancement initiative here, one of the things we invested in at the system office was working with all of our institutions to develop 10 course enhancements. So these areas such as biology, chemistry 1, organic chemistry, et cetera, and we had faculty members from around the system who drove the curation of OER resources, and the entire purpose of this was, okay, a faculty member is going to take their course online, and what do they start with? And so there's lots of material in here, not only the OER resources, but also interactivities and other suggestions on given them a jump start to move their courses online. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that also. Other questions for Jacqueline and Jeannie before we conclude?
I just have one quick question. First of all, thanks again for a great presentation. Very helpful. And as Jim mentioned earlier, many of our digital learning community members are really interested in understanding what's available to them. My quick question to you, and I don't mean to split a hair, but based on your expertise in the way you're evaluating these open educational resources, what is your perspective on the resource or the providers updating and maintenance of these resources? Because we know it's a Herculean effort to get those resources out to market, right? And then what we hear sometimes is that the maintenance and the upkeep sometimes lags behind. But, you know, just your thoughts on that challenge, if you will.
Also, you want to go, Jim? I'm going to say something.
I can add that that is an issue that the open community is kind of looking at, is the sustainability of it. You know, a lot of it, as Jacqueline mentioned, is really grassroots. So the upkeep piece of it is a question. And with some of the repositories, you know, some of the stuff is a little bit older, but some of the OpenStax specifically, they do update their textbooks, and they, like the sociology book I shared is in a second edition. They also have a running list of everything that they've corrected that's completely open. So you can see and report issues of this video doesn't work, or even, you know, this information is not correct or something like that. And they will go back. I believe they do it in the summer to kind of do some of those tweaks. And then if there's information that's incorrect, they'll do, you know, kind of a large edition change.
Oh, that's great to know. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Jeannie, Jacqueline, and Wanda, thank you so very much for your presentations today. You could see from the chat a lot of interest. A lot of folks want to know when this will be posted, and it'll be posted probably by Monday, and you'll be able to share this with colleagues around the system. I will mention that we are due for another digital learning webinar last Friday of the month in August 28th. Tom Rogers at Western Carolina is going to talk about Camtasia. Now, this is a program that faculty have to pay for as opposed to a free program, but we've had a lot of interest in our designing effective online courses around this, and Tom has graciously accepted our invitation to talk about it. In addition, we have some folks from McGraw-Hill and Chapel Hill talking about the use of their digital learning products, how it's being used for virtual labs and adaptive learning, as well as online assessment. And then I would say, lastly, we're always open to other presentations. So if you or your colleagues have some things you'd like to share with the rest of the digital learning community across the UNC system, please reach out to John or I. And then also, if you go up to dli.northcarolina.edu, these presentations are up there, discussions about other things, all things digital, as well as the upcoming digital course that we'll be running again to help faculty moving online. So with that, I'll say goodbye. And again, thank you to our presenters today. It's been a pleasure hearing from you, and it's been a pleasure seeing so many participate in this forum. Thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a great weekend.